of you to My Life, My Story. I'm Curiato, and I'm so glad to see all of you. It's just great, the following that we get. I'm really excited about it. I remember when we started BioBuffs, I don't know how many years ago. Chris would know, but it was a lot of years ago. And there were about 6 or 7 of us, and we met in a lounge. And somehow BioBuff survived, and now we've got My Life, My Story, which is just a great addition. And I'd like to thank our staff, which today consists of Nada and Don Gill, and the rest of them were already here and ready to work, but they've done such a great job for us, so thank you there. I'd like to turn it over to Glen today. Glen is, as you know, a retired colonel, and he's been all over the world, I believe. He's got a lot of story to tell you, so let's get started.
My father was a preacher, and every Sunday when he gave a sermon, he'd take his watch off, put it on the lectern, and proceed. And one day he asked me, Glenn, do you know what it means when a preacher takes off his watch and puts it on the lectern? No, it doesn't mean a thing. Well, to start off with, my mom, my mother was born, raised, and still lives in a town called Weiser, Idaho, which is a little bump on the western border of Idaho that sticks into Oregon. Dad grew up in Denver. They met in college in Kansas and then went to Chicago, where Dad went to seminary and where I and one of my brothers was born. They wanted to raise their children in a small town, though, so they eventually moved back to Weiser, and Mom is still there. Dad became junior high principal. Mom taught there and at the high school, and they had the 4 sons. Starting off, this is Bethany Methodist Hospital in Chicago, where I started off. A little bit older there, starting to learn my alphabet. But this is a small town that we grew up in, Weiser, Idaho. And here you are, welcome to Weiser. I went to Central School, which was a 2-room red brick country schoolhouse, about half a mile down the road from where we lived. The first day of school, not too far. The first day of school, Mom said, Glenn, go to school, walk down the road. Well, I was a little scared. It's about 100 yards to the end of our lane. Then I turned and looked, and there was a school not quite half a mile away. So I looked, I couldn't see anyone there because it's still early. So I walked back. She had 3 younger brothers of mine to raise, so she couldn't come with me. And she said, Glenn, why are you back? And I said, there's nobody there. And she said, go out. And so I went back, and this time there were playing. And I said, I got scared again, turned around, came back, and said, school's already started. And she said, no, go back again. So I walked to the end of the lane, and this time there was no one out in the yard. School had indeed started. But I knew better than to go back, so there it went. Mom herself was a school teacher and had taught me to read and write already. So because Johnny Alder was the only boy, and there were 5 girls in the 2nd grade class, and because I could already read and write, she moved me up there with him rather than to suffer through the lot. 10 years later, that wouldn't have bothered him. But anyway, I stayed, and Johnny and I were in 2nd grade. And that's Weiser. Now, on October 4th, 1957, was when the Russians launched Sputnik into space. I was 10 years old at the time, and I, for some reason, wandered into the living room, saw Mom and Dad watching TV, watching Sputnik. And being a precocious but not terribly wise 10-year-old, and knowing that Russia and US were not on good terms back then, I started worrying, what if they invade Weiser and take it over? I'd better get ready. So I did. I found a textbook of Russian and tried to teach myself the language. Didn't work very well. So when I got to high school, I was able to take Spanish, to German, in college, I was able to take Germany. And when I was stationed at Keesler, because I wanted to read the Bible in the original languages, I got the rabbi there to at least start me out on Hebrew. He said, Glenn, you're doing really well. He heard that Jane and I were going on our first trip to Israel. He said, when you get over to Israel, I have one bit of advice: speak English. So I did manage to pick up the book of Genesis, memorize the first two verses, and came home and trying to impress my dad and quoted him the first two verses of the Bible in Hebrew. And Dad said, that's very good. And then, as I mentioned, he had been to seminary, but that was several years ago. He proceeded to quote me the first two verses of the New Testament in Greek, which he hadn't read in years. I learned one valuable lesson: never try to outsmart the old man. So Dad was junior high principal, and Mom one of the teachers there. I went out for football, basketball, and track in junior high and high school. For track, I ran and here's a picture of the high school from a distance. I ran the half mile and mile. In college, I managed to run the mile my freshman year in 4:46. I darn near died. I'd never gone that fast before. Academically, I did well at school. High school, I got straight A's throughout the school. And I was kind of the big intellectual frog in the small pond. But then for college, I went back to Columbia College in the city of New York. Yeah, that Columbia. And found out I was a medium-sized toad in the academic ocean. But I did well. I did make the dean's list once, and basically going from Weiser to New York City was a bit of an adjustment. I remember Mom and Dad putting me on the train to go back. I had picked up one classmate in Fruitland, Idaho, and we changed trains in Chicago. So that was kind of my break into big city. We lived on a farm in a place called Jenkins Creek. Oh, wait a minute. Here's a picture of the high school that I went to. Again, Weiser was a town of about 5,500 people, well, 4,000 people back then. And on home life, we lived on a farm on Jenkins Creek Road, right across the road from Mom's brother. Grandpa had been a farmer. My job was to set gopher tracks. I'd set the traps, and whenever I caught a gopher, I would get I'd get a nickel for the tail. But if one of those gophers ever got onto our lawn, Mom boosted it up to a quarter. Anyway, Weiser High School, or Weiser, Idaho, one of our kind of trademarks or landmarks is Indian Head Mountain, which, well, as you can see from the profile, the Snake River is the river that you're seeing. And in the later years, when Mom and Dad sold the home, they went down there. For summers, I went up to Camp Billy Rice up in McCall, Idaho, or near McCall, Idaho, every summer. Now, they encouraged the Boy Scouts to do well, let me back up a little bit. They encouraged the Boy Scouts to do the mile swim, which I did once. Then, some of you may remember, around 1963, President Kennedy was encouraging people to take a 50-mile walk. So I went and talked to one of the other scouts there and said, hey, let's go down to well, actually it was Cascade tonight after the scout camp is over for the day. So he and I and a few others went down. They kind of petered out and came back, but the other scout and I went all the way into Cascade. By now it was dark. And then we turned around and came back. The last 5 miles, he was really tuckered out, had to grab hold of my backpack, which didn't help me, but what could I do? Knock over water. We made it the rest of the way back. Now, I had gotten the scoutmaster's permission, But I didn't tell the camp director that one of his, staff was walking the 50-mile hike. So he wasn't pleased, but he was very forgiving. Told me not to do it again. He didn't have to say that. But here's kind of an overview of Weiser, and that's, again, it's the Snake River. I was trying to find a place. I can't believe this. This is Mom and Dad's, it's Mom's home on the Snake River. Here's the barn. I didn't think it was on. No, seriously, that's a surprise. But anyway, that was where I grew. Well, I didn't grow up there. They sold the house when I went to, and built this one when I went to college, but my younger brothers were there. Okay, my aim at college had been to become a math professor eventually, because that was one of my better subjects. But math and physics were hard. And although I did make the dean's list once, I figured out I'd probably change and become, decided I also get interested in medicine. This is Columbia College. You may have seen this on a Low Library on the news recently, but sorry, I forget to what's the point. This is alma mater, and this was school in happier days. I hope things straighten out. I went out for football. As you can see, they put me on the line because I wasn't fast enough, or although I was small for a lineman, having me handle the ball was out of the question. So there I was. Then to medical school. The Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons, which is PNS, was 52 blocks uptown from Columbia College. First 2 years were classroom, last 2 years on specialty training. One Sunday, I went to church and met Jane. And so I asked her if she'd like to come with the church's college and career club to the Gold Rail Tavern for lunch. That's an odd place to go to after church, but in New York City, you could not sell liquor before 5 o'clock. So the tavern food was great and cheap because that's not where they made their money. So I invited Jane. I was still a little shy, so I invited a couple girls she was with to come along to mask my intentions. That was in in October of 1969. After lunch, the other kids had gone. We went back up to Columbia to talk for a couple of hours. That was, like I said, October 69. For our first date, I asked her the following February to go to a concert with me. And she turned me down and said, no, why don't you take somebody else? And then a little bit later, she came back and said, do you still have those tickets? Yes. That was in February, and we were engaged 2 months later and married in September 1970. So when people ask us, well, where did you guys meet? Jane will say, we met in a church. And I'll tell people, we met in a bar in New York City. And we're both correct. At PNS, I had a part-time job in the blood bank. Here's Columbia, now Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons. There's the college, and this is Bard Hall. Oh, back up a little bit. Jane got a job at the Martin Luther King Clinic in the Bronx as a pediatric nurse practitioner. So she put us, she was kind of the breadwinner for our first 2 years. Between classes and the blood bank, I was gone most of the day for these first couple of years, but Jane loved me, stood by with me, and supported me, so I'm very grateful for that. But the highlight of our time at PNS was when, in the 4th year of medical school, you could apply for a medicine in the tropics elective. I got a permission to do that, and so we went to India for 10 weeks. As medicine in the tropics, Jane and I went to Mysore, India. Food is kind of spicy, but the people were nice. Back at that time, the official language was English. I never could do Malayalam. Uh, when I tried to, it didn't, no one, they kind of looked at me as funny. So the official language was English. And the food was generally quite spicy. But we ate it. However, we both of us got gastroenteritis. Jane lost 10 pounds. I found one of them, so I did better. And there we are. As you can see, there's a halo over Jane's head, and it was well deserved. And there we are walking down the aisle. So, yeah, that was a great time. And here we are. Here's my daughter who managed to come here today. She's sitting in the front row. You might not recognize her, but that's her. So anyway, in our 53 years of marriage, I've got to admit, I've been a pain in the butt now and then. Well, Jane got the even. She wasn't intending to. Because I was exposed to the hepatitis, I had to get a vaccination. And back then, they would re-sterilize the needles. You do that a few times, and you're liable to get a burr on the needle. So I said, I'll get my hepatitis shot. Jane gave it to me, squirted it in, pulled it out, and it tugged. And finally, fortunately, I was kind of a dead-end kid, and it didn't stick. It didn't, it did stick. It didn't hurt that much. Eventually got it out. Jane said, she was really embarrassed, and she could truthfully have said without exaggeration, this hurts me more than it hurts you. For those of you interested in the cutaneous neurovascular structure, the nerve endings in the gluteus are farther apart than they are on, say, the palm of your hand. So she managed to miss. Okay, to get to India, we chose to fly around the world. We flew from New York City to Boise for Idaho for Christmas in 1971. Then we flew to San Francisco for New Year's Days and to see Jane's parents. Then to Hong Kong, Thailand, and finally to Bangalore in South India. On the way home, we went through Israel and Scotland, where we spent time with friends. In Israel in 1972, we were free to travel to Hebron, and also visit what is now called the West Bank. We visited the Temple Mount, the Sea of Galilee, and the generally accepted locations of Christ's crucifixion and tomb. Both the cross and the body and the tomb are now gone. One anecdote, I once went into a store. This is in the capital city of Israel. And I asked the clerk, not do you speak English, but do you speak anything besides Hebrew? He kind of looked a little irritated and then said, I speak 7 languages. Which one do you want? I want hydrology language. Okay, I said English, and we'd been to Israel about 3 or 4 times since then. After medical school, we went to Barnes Hospital and to Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. Both of our children, by the way, were born in St. Louis. I started out in surgery and our goal was to become a medical missionary eventually, but I developed atopic dermatitis. Basically, that's kind of a blistering of your hand, and scrubbing with a brush was not very good. I'd seep fluid, and that's not. So I switched to specialties to radiation oncology, also still at Mallinckrodt. And it was nice to get back in touch with the college in physics I had studied in college. This is Barnes Hospital. That's Mallinckrodt Institute of Radiology, where the arrow is pointing to. And that's where I did surgery for 2 years, radiation therapy for 2.5 years as a resident, and then got on faculty for half a year until Uncle Sam drafted me. So Anyway, I was selected for what was called the Berry Plan, which allowed you to male physicians to finish their residency. At that time, the Vietnam War was on, so you could get drafted as a medical student halfway through internship, 6 months to go in your residency. When they wanted you out, the came. So I applied for the Berry Plan to get a deferment. And the good news was that I got the Berry Plan and I was selected. Bad news was that 6 months later they abolished it. Because, and the problem with that was when you accepted the Berry Plan, you went from 90% chance of getting drafted to 100% because you had a commission. But I had signed up and off I went. Okay. I mentioned I did 2 years of surgery and then 2.5 years in radiation therapy, which came in handy because when I went to the Air Force, I went to the Keesler Air Force Base, whose cobalt unit was placed in the basement. This is a linear accelerator. This is a linear accelerator, not a cobalt unit. Yeah, and here's the board. So the cobalt unit was naturally down in the basement. We were there for Hurricane Frederick in 1979. The eye of Hurricane Frederick was 50 miles across, wind speeds of up to 130 miles an hour. So we had to move in from Ocean Springs, where our home was, to Biloxi and went down into the basement where the radiation therapy facilities were. Our home was kind of got messed. Our tool shed got completely blown away back across the street and back again. But the good news is that the previous owner or someone had played soccer, had lost their ball under the garage. The garage was picked up, smashed, thrown across the street, and we got a nice intact soccer ball. Okay, now for military. This is one when I came from surgery to radiation oncology. It is now claimed that men who work much with the x-rays become irascible and irritable. Some very ugly reports are being made as to mental disturbances. But I completed my training anyway. Whether or not I got the disturbances, you'll have to judge. Okay. Here's Michael and Sarah a little bit. Okay, let me back up. Because of my training, I was approved for a classification of secret clearance in the military. So just to see what secret clearance was like, I went to a briefing. Basically, it was a show and tell of Soviet military capabilities and weaknesses and what their long-term aims for Russia and for communism were thought to be. I had intended to serve my 2 years and then go out to practice, but I saw that in the Air Force I had a purpose. I was playing a positive role, albeit a very small one, in the defense of our country. So I signed up for 20 years. Because I wanted to get involved more in operational medicine, I switched from radiation therapy to aerospace medicine and became a flight surgeon, eventually got board certification in both specialties. But because of my training in the medical effects of radiation and the fact that radiation exposure increases with altitude. Anyway, I went to Beale Air Force Base, which is the home of the U-2 and the SR-71. These are strategic reconnaissance aircraft that fly at very high altitude. The unclassified altitude are 60,000 for the U-2, 60,000 feet, and 80,000 for the SR-71. That's the cruising altitude. The ceiling altitudes are about 10,000 feet higher. Because of my training in the medical effects of radiation and the fact that radiation exposure increases with altitude, I was assigned to Beale Air Force Base. You have to suit up like an astronaut. In fact, in this suit, you could actually, if it weren't for the heat transfer, you could walk on the surface of the moon if you had your oxygen with you. So that was kind of fun. What they did, though, they took an Erlenmeyer flask, basically filled it halfway with water and put it beside me in the altitude chamber. Then they ran the altitude chamber up and up. The temperature didn't change a bit, but around 55,000 feet, I looked over at the Erlenmeyer flask, and lo and behold, the water was boiling. And the moral of the story that if I had not been wearing one of these, that is, you've heard about, well, my blood was boiling, but this would have happened. It fortunately did not. They also trained you in a centrifuge. And then here's the U-2. It's called the Dragon Lady. As you can see, the wingspan is rather large. I was given what they called an incentive flight in the U-2. So they had the pilot up front, and it's normally a single-seat aircraft. The trainer, of course, has two seats, front and back. And so the pilot was in the front seat, and I was the quack in the back. So we went up to 70,000 feet. I got to see, and you won't believe your eyes, but if you look carefully, I took this at about 70,000 feet, and the Earth is indeed round. So you got to trust your eyeballs on that. The Earth is definitely round. Okay, one airplane story. I once was allowed to do a touch and go in the U-2, or the STR-1B, as the training version was called. And the pilot, what the U-2 does, the pilot can't really see where his wheels are. And the wingspan is so broad that the surface, air surface, keeps the plane high enough that you can't, back up. The surface of the wings blocks your vision of the ground. So what they do, because the U-2 can go very slow, is that they'll have a chase car. And as the pilot comes in to land on the runway, the chase car will come in behind him and say, you're 5 feet off the ground, 4 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot, 1 foot. And then the pilot will literally pull back on the throttle, stall the engine, and the plane literally falls out of the sky, which is only 1 foot high at the time. He let me, the pilot, do one of the touch and goes. And so I heard over the intercom, 3 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot, 3 feet. And then I dropped the airplane. And I thought it landed okay, but when we were walking back to the hangar, the chase pilot, the guy in the car who was telling us you were 2 feet off the ground, he turned to my pilot and said, and the pilot said, oh, that's it. Of course, the other time, when I went to Soesterberg Air Base, which is next on the schedule, I got to fly in an F-15, and they had we didn't do touch and goes, but he did allow me to fly the aircraft once we got up at level cruising altitude, 20,000, whatever it was. And he said, "Okay, Doc, you've got the stick now," and transferred control of the aircraft to me. And he said, "Okay, trim it." He trimmed everything up. Well, I better not touch anything. You just kind of use the button to push forward. That'll cause you to drop a little bit, or if you pull back, it'll allow you to climb. So I was up there at 30,000 feet, and the pilot said, "Okay, Doc, I've got it in trim now. Just keep your hand on the trim. Don't move the handle." And off we went. And then he said, starting to climb, "Okay, Doc, bring it down a little bit." So I pushed it down. Back up some, a little bit later. Up, down, and then hold it. Doc, we got to go cold mic. What that means is that he turns off the transmission so I can't hear what he's saying. What happened while I was on cold mic is that the ground crew had called him and said, "What's going on with the aircraft? It's bouncing all over the sky." Well, I didn't hear that, but what I did hear next was, "Okay, Doc, I got the stick now." And on we went. Okay, our next round Earth. Oh, here's the SR-71. No, they did not let me fly in one of these. but I did, at least get into the cockpit. Well, this is the Reeves family. There's Mom, who turned 100 last Thanksgiving, and here she is with Jane and me and my cousin. And here's the whole Reeves tribe a few months before her birthday. That's Mom, as you can see, is in the second row. Here is, that's me, Jane, our son Michael, son-in-law David. Where's Jerry? Oh, here's Sarah. Oh, brother. There's my brother Jim, my brother Jerry, and which should be, I'm kind of at an angle. Never mind. Just figure Sarah, Glen, Jane, Michael, our family, and the rest, and then most in the center of the picture is, of course, Mom. So in Holland, that was my first assignment, our next assignment after Beale. I became the clinic commander. Holland, as there are flowers everywhere. The Dutch are great horticulturalists. So I'm just going to run through them. This is, again, our son, daughter, and then I think that's you, Jane, isn't it? And here was our house off base. We were off base for about 9 months, and then you go on base. This was the countryside that we're in, the bridge over some of the dikes. Netherlands, as most of you know, much of it is below sea level. But it is really beautiful going out into the countryside. And I think that's feeding the swans. Favorite dish in Holland is herring, and this is how you eat herring. You just take it, open your mouth, and down it goes. That's me, and this is you, isn't it? This is Mom at the airport, and then that's her with me. That's why while we were in the Netherlands. And then Mom, Sarah. Okay, Uncle Sam's service. I think I'm a little bit out of sequence, sorry. Okay, I'll run through these. This is me. I made getting colonel. That's Commander Murph Davis, Colonel Murph Davis on the left. And there's Jane, Sarah, and Michael. I'll let you figure out which is which. But the buttons, okay, you got to know the badges. This is a physician's badge, and this is the flight surgeon. Apologize, I think I'm out of sequence. Well, we'll just take the sequence then. We'll leap ahead to when I was assigned to the country of Kazakhstan. Actually, I wasn't assigned there. This was, well, you can read as well as I can, but basically that was the Soviet nuclear weapon testing site above ground. As you can see, they're about 3 years behind us on when they tested their first nuclear weapon. The Soviet government, they were playing catch-up ball. We had set off our nuclear weapons back in 45, and they cut corners when they were doing plutonium refinement, weapon construction, and wound up with fairly high incidence of sickness, radiation sickness. Here is the country of Kazakhstan. The capital today is Astana, and then Almaty is down here. Right in here was what they called the polygon, which was basically an odd-shaped piece of ground that and here's one of the nuclear weapons that they set off. Here's Kazakhstan, again, the Semipalatinsk test site. There, and then this is Semipalatinsk, abbreviated SEMI. Here's Almaty, where the capital used to be. You don't have to memorize Uzbek, Kazakhstan, or Kyrgyzstan, or Tajikistan, but we did spend some time there. As a physician, you have to have a lot of jobs. Flight surgeon, this is one of my patients. He survived. However, there were 15 of us on this trip to Kazakhstan, so I did earn my keep. 3 came down with gastroenteritis severe enough to hospitalize them for a couple of days. One of the 15, in fact, there's just one person, though, who refused to go to the hospital, even though I told him he had to. And he was our Russian interpreter. He knew what the hospitals in Kazakhstan were like, and he was not going to go no matter what. Here we are entering the base, the test site. This is the soldier right there, and it's just several miles of wasteland, basically. It was in one of the more sparsely populated areas of Kazakhstan, obviously. Here's the control board. Don't press the wrong button or you started, never mind. And here's one of the reactors that they had on base. Here's the Operation Groundhog in Kazakhstan, one of their early weapons. One of the problems, the reason you have so much fur and fuzz down at the bottom, was that they didn't always, you dig a hole in the ground, put the nuke in, put the dirt and dust back in, and sometimes you didn't pack it down hard enough, and that's what happened. You get a lot of nasty fallout. Downstream, this is some of the buildings that were in the Kazakh countryside, and as you can see, I think it was about, this is at least a couple miles away, and it collapsed. A picture of the hydrogen bomb. This is called Atomic Lake, and here's its approximate size. They set off a bomb, which later filled up. Here's a test tower 5 kilometers from ground zero that was in the polygon. You don't see a top on it. That's because it got blown off. And here's a picture with a top on, and here's some character climbed up to here, but I can't blame him too much because I thought, I'll climb one of these towers. So I climbed one, and again, this wasn't triangular shaped. I got up to here, then I started to go up the pole. And here's what the radar at the top looked like. But here's what the tower looked like after the blast. So I started climbing up the pole, and I talked to myself, this is really good. This really feels sturdy. Then I was going up and up and up. I said, this tower has withstood several nuclear weapon blasts. And I wonder if it's weakened a little bit. Back down. Some team measuring. This is a great man. I'm going to give a few war stories. This is Professor Saim Balmukhanov. He was older man. He was one of the founders of radiation science and biology in Kazakhstan. He was chief radiologist of the Ministry of Health and a member of the Kazakhstan Academy of Sciences. Wrote about 450 professional publications. I've written 12, 15. Anyway, Professor Balmukhanov, really fine man. And that's winter. Here's the Shopka. You may have seen one of these around Royal Oaks. That's not mine, that's his, but wear it. This is out near this test site. Raphael Arakunian was it was an Armenian physician. Can't tell you this guy's name, can't tell you what he does for a living, can't tell you who wasn't always welcome. But anyway, this is a yurt, which is kind of basically a tent. The Kazakhs are a very nomadic people, and they would, this is what they do, they'd set up a yurt, and on the inside, this is for the camera, they really weren't this elaborate, but it wasn't all hardship duties. And we were out at the Semipalatinsk test site, and these young ladies, they would take the food and water, bring it out to us, the crew, while we were doing measurements and stuff like that. One more thing about Balmakhanov. He was a physician. He went to two villages, Dologne and Sarjal, in 1955, noted several shepherds who had hair loss and large skin lesions. And he noted that their clinical presentations were similar to those who survived the atomic bombs in Japan. So he reported this to the Kazakhstan Academy of Sciences. The next year, he led a team of 6 doctors to do a really close study and compare diseases in the village to diseases that weren't subject to the fallout. So, and he wrote this to the Ministry of Defense in Moscow. Moscow told him these effects are due to poor diet, sanitation, and hygienic practices. And they said, Balmakhanov, don't you dare publish your findings. And don't leave Moscow until you phoned our office and told us. But eventually he did get to go. Okay, this is from Afghanistan or nearby. These are a photograph of Kazakhstani girls in traditional dress. Okay, interaction with the citizens there. I did get into one snowball fight with a guy. It was a friendly snowball fight. The other fellow was the deputy mayor of Ozyorsk, which was formerly a classified city, a secret city that outsiders couldn't visit. Anyway, the mayor and I tossed a few snowballs, but a couple guys got really nervous and they kind of told us to stop. It was no problem. Here's another tradesman. Here is Almaty, the capital of Kazakhstan, in 1990, and then 31 years later. I, of course, was back on the one on the left. Russia, a pretty good-sized country. Here is Chelyabinsk, where their plutonium production plant was located, near here. Yekaterinburg, here's Moscow up here, and here's Kazakhstan down here, Almaty. And like I said, the polygon was right here. A seminar there, scientific seminar on chronic radiation illness, which was one of the radiation subspecialties I got interested in. So I attended that in 1995. Okay, this building is the governmental headquarters of the KGB, House of New York of Russian Federation. This is a meeting I got to attend. That's the Russian flag in the back. And then these are some cathedrals around Russia. I hate to run through such beautiful pictures so quickly, but Moscow River. Here's a cathedral. This is a candy cane cathedral. Another one. Here's the one I wanted to show you. This is Red Square, the area there. This place back here is Lenin's tomb. Lenin was an interesting, what am I trying to say? And that was the horse and buggy he rode. Lenin was quite a guy. He, as you all know, there are thousands of statues of him in Russia. But after the breakup of the Russian Federation, a lot of the statues, particularly in some of the neighboring countries, were broken down. We had one guy who was ostensibly our interpreter. He spoke only in Russian. We never heard him speak English, so there's always a translator with him. Well, one day, we were at dinner, and I was sitting across the table from our interpreter. And I said, well, Mark, they had torn down the statue of Lenin. And I said, well, Mark, I see that dead Fred is gone. And the guy suddenly became alert, turned toward me, glared, and I thought to myself, this guy doesn't speak English. But Mark said, Dr. Colonel Reeves, Lenin is still held in very high regard here. So I just kept my mouth shut. As I mentioned, I'd learned a few languages over the way, but I've, a little bit of, Spanish, German, Dutch, Greek, Hebrew. Um, but I can't keep my mouth shut in any of them. This is the Tietcha River. I mentioned the Russians were trying to play catch-up ball. They would throw reactor waste less than a certain concentration into the river. And so the river looks like in springtime, well, this is getting towards spring, the snow's melting, but the water would overflow onto the banks, and it was radioactive. This you can't quite see, but it's about 1.6 milliroentgens per hour. I won't go into the math on that, but that's basically it's not a lethal dose, but if you gave a whole year's dose all at once, a person would get really sick. Anyway, there is a disease called chronic radiation sickness, which is due to exposure. And Russia wound up, like you see, this is a river that waters no, this is a river, that watered the farms. And it would, the banks of the Tietcha would overflow every spring, and that was irrigation, but it'd bring the radiation that had been dumped into it by the plant, the Mayak plutonium production plant, a few kilometers upstream. And finally, Russia said, well, I wonder what's going on. They measured the readings, and they wound up evacuating 22 cities. And there is a disease, like I said, called chronic radiation syndrome. I won't go into it. Basically, it's fatigue, hair loss, irritability, loss of certain neurological functions, and it's caused by exposure to radiation for too long. It's not the same thing as the acute radiation sickness, which you get in the blast. Anyway, I was down by the riverside, and the Russians were smarter. They were up here. They were up here waving, "Hi, Glen, hope you're having a good time." This is Professor Alexei Yablokov. He was a Minister of Economic, let me get his title straight, um, Ministry of Environment and Public Health for the Russian Federation. He was what we would call in the States a greenie. He was very concerned about conservation and didn't want the river radiation levels to get too high. This is his friend, Dr. Seufer. Seufer was a scientist who I met quite a bit while I was in Washington, D.C. I'm not going to tell you who these people are because one of them I was cautioned not to. Back up. This is Professor Seufer, a little surprise. This is Dr. Reeves, and these are three smiling Russians. I forget what we were doing. This is our driver. Most of the time he was awake. Our interpreter, Richard Moorfield, and I told you the story in the Acorn about time that he translated for me, and I said, but I am a spy, and I said, don't translate that, and he did. Nothing happened. This is Natalia Alexandrovna Chernysheva. She is the daughter of one of the, or was the, or still is, of one of the foremost nuclear scientists, theoretical physicists in Russia. And so she was at, one evening, Chernysheva and his wife and daughter were at our meeting in downtown Moscow. His wife had to go home and cook. I accompanied her because she was a country girl from Sarov, one of the classified cities, and she didn't know her way around Moscow subways. So you have this Westerner who speaks little to no Russian with her navigating through the subways of Moscow. Okay, we got to her place, delicious dinner, and then at the end of it, on the way back, I'd said, thank you very much, or большое спасибо, and got on the train to go back home. And Natalia insisted on coming with me. Oh, I know my way back, but I said, oh, I'll just go ahead. And we went down to the subway and went from her folks' home down to where my hotel was. I decided to get out and say, okay, well, thank you again, Natalia. No, I'll go with you. What's going on? That's not most unmacho. I'm supposed to be escorting you, not the other way around. Anyway, we came up to the top of the escalator in the subway station, and all of a sudden she turned around and went back. I said, "What on earth is this about?" And then I realized she spoke English very well, and they were not concerned about my getting lost. They were concerned about my meeting someone on the way that they didn't want me to talk with. You don't want too many colonels from the Air Force running around the Moscow subways. This, this is Professor Yablokov, and this is the Kremlin back here. This is from his office. So now actually, this isn't the Kremlin. I'm inside the Kremlin taking a picture of Yablokov. They had this big map of Russia on the wall with the locations of all the nuclear test sites and things of that nature, I thought. And Yablokov and Seufer walked out and to talk to each other. And I said, I wonder what would happen if I took a picture of this map inside the Kremlin. I decided I didn't want to know. When we were on the road, this is what the ordinary radiation oncologist would use for a bathroom. Here's the toilet, here's the shower up here, towel. And here's what our boss, Tara, got to use. And as in porcelain tub, Tara O'Toole. Snow, they have plenty of that in Russia. These are some pictures of various cathedrals and sites in downtown Moscow. I apologize for running through them. Anyway, my job was basically to do report on Russian medical studies on the effects of radiation. And I think so I went, that's how Seufer got involved with me, Bamakhanov. And we did learn quite a bit because Russian scientists, they weren't allowed to publish for so many years, and finally they could, though it had to be unclassified. Anyway, this is a saying I ran across. We did learn something, but we have not succeeded in answering all of our problems. Indeed, we often feel we have not completely answered any of them. The answers we have found only serve to raise a whole set of new questions. In some ways, we feel we are as confused as ever, but we believe that we are confused on a higher level and about more important things. And this is the I think KGB headquarters again. Back up one. No, I'm going to leave it here. Sorry. Anyways, Seufer took me on a car trip. He said, Glen, I want to show you my, Seufer was Jewish. Seufer said, Glen, I want you to show you my most favorite site in all Russia. And Seufer had spent his time, like I mentioned, I think I mentioned earlier, back in, he about got thrown into jail. And when President Reagan took office, he requested Gorbachev to release by name 3 scientists. One of them was Seufer. Anyway, Seufer said, Glen, do you want to see my most favorite site in all Russia? So we went heading down toward what is the KGB headquarters. And Kesselov was driving our car and said, Glen, do you see that? Do you see it? No, I don't see that. And then he said, okay, we'll go around. So right in front of we U-turned right in front of KGB headquarters, came down the road a ways, U-turned again, and came down and said, Glen, do you see my most favorite site in all Russia? And he was talking about the cross. What had previously been there was a statue of Felix Dzerzhinsky, who was one of the meanest, most cruel men in all Russia. He founded the KGB, and they tore down his statue. And I don't think he was mourned nearly as much as Lenin was. And they had installed a cross. I don't know who did that. To the best of my knowledge, like I say, we had this is a situation. We had a U.S. Air Force officer out of uniform taking pictures while driving around Lubyanka near KGB headquarters in the company of a refusnik whom they had extensively interrogated and nearly jailed. So Seufer said, Glen, did you see it? I said, yes, and I got this picture. And so I first said, okay, we better go now. So they did. But that final travel detour in Moscow strengthened my own faith as well as increased my hope for the future of the Russian people, who, by the way, are really, like all people groups, they are a fine, fine people. They've suffered a lot and they've endured a lot of hardship. Anyway, this cross may not be there now, but its effect on me, and especially the Russians, will last. And that's Vaprosi. Thank you for coming. This is the lady in the front row here a few years ago. Vaprosi есть. Any questions? Because I think I.
Thank you for your presentation. My goodness, what a fascinating life you have led. And thank you for sharing it with us. And again, thank you to you and to our crew.
Let's thank Carrie for all that she does, and she has a birthday coming up. Join me in singing happy birthday to Carrie. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Carrie. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you. You just made it special. If you got to have them, it might as well be a birthday song from you guys. So thank you so much.